2019, he started Be Lazy. He works with Nimdzi Insights since 2020, and he helps enterprise customers with TMS selection, process optimization, and automation. He's eager to eliminate the silos of translation software, and he wants to bring this area to the mainstream with APIs, orchestration, and business intelligence. István, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Arben. Just imagine we were at the speed networking before, and like we sat at the same table with Arben, and I was about to have my introduction, and he says, I'm gonna do it for you in 1 minute. And so he did. So welcome and thank you very much for joining this session. So first of all, I'd like to ask you a question. Reporting, business reporting. This is probably something that all of you want to have, many of you have. And just think about it, like how actionable reports you have, how good your reports are. Like, do you see everything you want to see in your company through numbers? Do you get those insights, what you need to do, or which part do you need to get to? And now just think about a number like between 1 and 5. 5 being absolutely, I see everything, and everything is great in my reporting, and 1 is like, now it's an intuitively managed company what I've got. You got the number? So I'm not going to expose anybody, so I only want to hear one thing. Who has given themselves a 5? Any hands up? Okay, thank you. I hope you are still listening. It's not because, not just that you don't understand my accent. So this presentation is about a method. I'd like to give a method about defining, measuring, conquering. And mostly for LSPs, but I think that enterprises, if there is anybody here, can also take some inspiration from it, though it's not directly applicable. And like, where does this thinking, where do these ideas come from? I mean, at Be Lazy, where I'm working, we are processing approximately 50,000 projects a month, which is, for a startup, it's okay. And these are projects coming from different customers to different types of project managers. So we've worked a lot with project managers to try to understand like how they are putting the different types of projects into their systems. And at Nimdzi, I'm also working with enterprises. And one thing that was super interesting is that most of the companies that come to us for like consultancy on TMS selection and other things, usually the problem is not that they are not able to select the TMS for themselves. Usually they have like a little bit of thinking to do with processes. It's never really what they come with, but after a couple of sessions, we find that there is some other problem that needs to be addressed. And that's what brought them there. So today, we're gonna define terminology. Lovely thing in the translation industry, because we don't get our terminology right. And what I'm trying to do is propose a couple of terms around project management. What else can we define? We can also add objectives. Objectives is what defines how people should be working. And we've got processes, which is like the exact way of workflows. What are we going to measure? Like KPIs, like everybody, obviously. But I think we need to find the right KPIs, and besides the right KPIs, it also needs to be based on true data. Self-entered data is not always very reliable. And then what are we conquering in the end? Scalability, consistency of the processes, comparability, the conquest of retaining the talent, and also I hope that I give you some pointers to help your PMs overcome the resistance to automation. So it's a method we are going to look at. Who is this lovely gentleman here? Anybody knows? Okay, shout. And please take a, exactly. So please take a photo and send it to him so that he's happy and feeling very included here. So what he was telling me is that LSPs mostly, he runs an LSP growth, a consultancy. And he was telling me that most LSPs view project management as a fixed cost. It's like it needs to be done because it's not so much money. It's about 20% of the revenue, more or less, not too much. Now I'm telling you one thing. In a technology company, usually the development budget is not more than 20% of a revenue. 20, 30 is like very normal. And do people not care about their developers? they do. So please, for an LSP, project management is the bread and butter. It is what LSPs sell. It defines the success rate of sales, the marketing, the management, everything, and impacts the translation quality. So if you want to be like really scaling up, you need to get the processes right, the project management right. Who is this gentleman? Is he here? Don, he's not here, okay. So we had like 3 years ago, we had a little bit of a discussion, and he was coming up that in China, the iPhones are still manually assembled. And he feels the same way about project management, that there is like so much variation that is just not really feasible to automate this kind of an activity. I started reading up about this topic, and turned out that iPhones are assembled manually because the manufacturing robots are not really able to put the tiny, tiny screws with the same precision because of the angles, because of not perceiving the angles correctly, and also the gluing. And because of this, it's manual. I mean, this is the client preparation of the translation projects, more or less, that you need to have good input, you need to have things that are pretty fixed, and then probably it can work. I'm missing a word here. This gentleman is here. I read this in a blog. What's the definition of today's respectable LSP? This was asked to the authors of the General Theory of Translation Company, and it was the ones that know what they do. And I love this because transparency it makes a respectable LSP. So, project managers. Would you like to hire this guy as a project manager? Hot, eh? So, or would you like to hire her?
It says no.
Why?
I don't know if you are familiar with Little Britain. So Carol is really an amazing project manager because she is able to say no to the customer. She is following rigorously the processes, but she's very dedicated in her work. So let's look at some profiles, and let's look at why people are like they are. So no matter what type of project managers you have, you definitely have the same goals. You want to have more revenue, you want to have a higher gross margin. This is, I don't think anybody would debate this here, right? But I came up with the concept of action hero PMs and supervisor PMs. And I think we are in a stage where the two are becoming somewhat different. So the action hero PM takes the customer. The customer is everything. The delivery is everything. Does all the feats and all the tricks in order to get something delivered on time. Controls the aspects. Controls everything so that there is no risk. It's going to happen. But what happens is that when the customer comes and there was really a screw-up, they do a root cause analysis, and the root cause analysis doesn't really have an impact. Things are not changing for the future. Also, like, you don't really know with these people like how many projects they are able to process in a day, right? But what you know is that you can rely on them. And it's also much harder for these kind of people to be trained, because there is not a fixed set of rules, but they are basically having the objective, and the main objective is control over the project and delivery on time. What's the supervisor PM? The supervisor puts the process first. If a process is designed, the process must be kept at all stake. They trust in the systems, they trust in the data, they are thinking about continuous improvements, they contribute to that. They don't really want to go into one-off things. I mean, obviously, occasionally, if something is at risk, of course, you try an alternative. But what they are trying to do is decreasing the number of outliers, getting the whole thing like much more uniform. This, like setting up a process with these kind of people takes longer. So a new customer comes on board, you are not up to speed tomorrow. But the whole thing becomes much more scalable. And this is what some of the customers want. The learning period is also like a little bit risky because you need to pay a lot of attention. And the automation may not be available yet, so they may actually do more work, unnecessary work, than the action heroes. I'm telling you one thing, I don't know how many of you remember my former colleague, Agnes Gazsó, who was like absolutely meticulous. I loved working with her because I'm more on the action hero type, but she was pinning me down to discuss every detail, every aspect of everything. And what's funny is that when she left the company to be on the client side, everything was documented. Getting a new person on board was super easy, and still, despite any growth, we didn't need more people in the organization. And that was because she was asking all those questions that I felt to be a waste of time answering at that point. So, let's just get into one system. Like, what is the central system of an LSP? Well, that's the business management system. These are the PluNets, FlowFits, XTRFs, Protemoses, Project X's, and many others, JustPoints, others, that most companies have a single system, but some of them built it, that is governing the processes, governing the resources, and like this is what an LSP cannot live without, because otherwise they don't know who the translators are, who are free, like what resources to apply. So what I'm going to do is try to come up with definitions, borrowing some terms from these tools for things. And many people are trying to calculate or report on projects. What I'm proposing is start from the other way around. Report on jobs. And what is a job? A job is the bottom up. It's the atomic unit of what a person needs to do in order to achieve some result. Like every process consists of jobs. It's an activity that you want to do to fulfill a client request. This is done by a person. It can be a PM, it can be an external team member, an internal team member, anybody. There are inputs, so they already know that there is something to work on. This may be the source file, this may be the TM, this may be just a status in a TMS. It is time-bound, so you need to have like starting now, finishing now. It produces a change. If nothing else, it's just a check, and after the check, you just put a checkbox that it was done. And it can be paid or it can be unpaid. I guess that all of you are familiar with the jobs. Typical jobs include translation, review, but in the meantime, you also have the QA, and what's more, you can also have the pre-DTP preparation, but it's also a job just to download the files from the client's system. And if the client uses two systems, it's two jobs, okay? So let's get granular. So, questions. Is defining a project workflow, is that a job? These are all questions that I'm just putting here, and it's up to you to answer these. Because you may decide like this or like that, and your reporting will be just as good. But these are things to think about, because these are the ones that somebody needs to answer down to the meticulous level. Are the jobs only relating to the translation and the production process, or are you also considering things like invoicing, for example, a job? How do you handle the query management? Like when the translator comes with a question and you need to forward that to the customer, is that a job? Or is that something that's a side activity? Or like, how do you handle this? And Don, you've missed yourself, you were on the screen. And how about the jobs that go backwards? Because sometimes you need to rework a translation. You need to do things like, how do you handle that? Is that going to be like a repeated job, or is it like something going back? So these are all things that you should just think about, take home. I mean, as I mentioned, this is a method. This is not something which is like a quick takeaway. And also bear in mind one thing. Projects or processes cannot be automated. Jobs can be. A process is automated if all the jobs in it are automated. So let's come up with a new concept, which is the task. Translation is parallel by default, because you translate the same thing into 50 languages, right? And then with different people being involved, it's a parallelization exercise. So what you need is a unit which is important for monitoring. What can go wrong? And usually it's a language delivery that can go wrong because the Spanish is completely independent from how the Chinese is getting along. And it's a set of jobs that you have under your control as a PM that can be started, finished, and reported on. So usually a task is one language, but not all the time. And it is a chain of jobs that you can perform without waiting for customers. Sometimes you get a customer review, but it comes or it doesn't come sometimes, or it comes late. You can't really include that in your own processes because that's something that's independent from you, and you don't have to be responsible for that either. And finally, you can also think about tasks as critical workflows, because before, for example, there is a nice InDesign document that needs to be translated into 20 languages. The first thing you do is a pre-DTP, right? You are checking if everything is correct, there are no hard returns in it, and there is a final DTP when everything is done, especially, for example, if it's a device manufacturer that needs a multilingual document in the end out of those 20 languages. And also you've got the optional workflows like linguistic quality assessment, which is also a very important thing today. So what is, for example, a delivery finalization? Is that a separate job? Depends on whether there is an activity that a project manager needs to perform. What about splitting up jobs? Do you consider them as a task, or do you consider them as a job? So if I have a long document and I need to send it to 2 translators, is that 2 task flows, or is it 2 different jobs in the same task flow? You decide. The point is that we need definitions, and what we need is reporting based on these data, on your decisions. And then finally, what to do with loopbacks in the workflow, which is like rework. That's a typical problem. Rework is a typical problem in flattening this whole thing and having insights into that. So, what is a project? We talked about tasks, we talked about jobs. What's a project? A project is imagination. A project as such, I don't think it exists. A project is an arbitrary unit of work that usually is decided by the LSP. And why is that so? Because one thing that the project managers do, and do very well, is bundling, is batching projects together in order to make the whole thing easier. For example, if there is a technology that offers you jobs separately instead of tasks, so you get a separate thing in a system for a translation and a revision, you still do the same thing. You combine that into a task. That's already a batching. Another thing is that you may also get, for example, bilingual files. If you get XLIF files, that's always bilingual. And you need to have like 50 times the same thing. People batch it up because a multilingual project is so much easier to handle. Also, sometimes to avoid minimum fees, you want to have these small batches put into a single thing, because then you don't need to pay the translator several times those 10, 20, 50 euros, dollars, sorry. That's also a batching exercise. So a project is something that you don't really need to care about as much as you care about the others. So what do you want to do? I mean, there are units that's missing. We didn't talk about the hourly, the jobs. We didn't talk about the cat analysis-based jobs. We didn't talk about the jobs that have page counts, word counts, all of these things. There is one thing I definitely recommend avoiding. I think it's the biggest nonsense that this industry has ever come up with: translating time into words. I don't know who came up with that idea, but I don't see any point in, charging somebody for 25, a quarter of an hour based on a word count. Why don't you charge a word count then? Don't understand. So the other thing is that the units need to relate to the workflows. And you also have variation today. Sometimes after post-editing is when you get the word count, what you pay for. This is a big change. Also, take into account that if you have this kind of after post-editing workflows, quoting is not possible. So quoting, forget about it. Also, we are used to speaking about files, we are talking about documents, but in reality, in project management, that doesn't really matter. It matters as a check. If I received 100 files, do I upload back 100 files or 99? That's the check. It's a job. Quoting is generally a task, right? Because after that, you need to wait. And I think what's very important is that once you identify the different job types for the project managers, you also need to put a size tag on it. So there are some things that are like very small job, like just, looking at it quickly if a file is okay. And there are things that take a longer time. A QA of a document, for example, depends very much on the size of the document as well. And if the size depends on something, use job units, otherwise just use like small, medium, large. And this way, you can make their work comparable. And now take into account the customer, because there is something which is, I like to call it an opportunity, which is a task or a job that is offered to you by the customer. What are your decision points? You can take it, that's great. Maybe the customer needs a quote. You send them a price and a deadline, or like a delivery time. And sometimes you just know about those projects that other LSPs receive. You can learn from that a lot. So that's also part of your reporting. If you know, for example, 2 LSPs are in the game and you know what the other does, maybe you see how you can build your further portfolio. So quoting is something that sometimes makes sense, sometimes doesn't make sense. I put together here a couple of reasons why customers need a quote. But generally, if you want to simplify processes, try to eliminate quoting as much as you can. If these reasons are not met, then just ask, like, can we just take it out? Can we just have an SLA instead? And then now it's time to look into the PM's work and make it visible. Create linear workflows as much as you can, because anything that's not linear is very, very hard to report on. If the PM has to do anything at all, that's a job. Anything. If they have to unzip a file, that's a job, okay? Any change is a job. Then, if there is a workflow step that in your systems is not documented, consider it not done. Don't believe that it's okay to have non-documented steps for project management. But it's a learning exercise. So if you start doing this, then you need to clean up what you were thinking about the jobs after doing a pilot run for a week or something. You need to come up with a final list of job types you have and how they are combined into tasks, how they are combined into workflows. So make the whole workflow completely qualified and long. And then expect resistance, because nobody likes to do administrative work. And this is administrative work. But this is the administrative work that you need for clarity of the data and for automation. So if you want to switch the mindset, this is how you can do it. Reporting. It's very important not to consider it as a system functionality. TMSs, BMSs, other systems are selling this as functionality. In reality, this is your report. It's how well you can answer the data needs for your insights. So you build it, you are responsible for it, because it's based on your concepts, your definitions. No technology can get this perfectly right if you don't have the processes right. Then the first thing is to start using the BMS reporting. Exporting data is all fine, but what happened is that over the last couple of years, you are not working in a single system. Your customers are all working in different TMSs. You are working in more than one project management system. You want to compare the reports with the reports from Salesforce and from all the CRMs. And it's not a single system that you need the information from. So business intelligence came, and data warehousing came from this perspective, late 2010. And think about it, that if you want to do good reporting, you need to do you need to combine the information coming from various systems. For example, just think about delivery. I mean, somebody can put into your system any kind of delivery date. Like it was delivered this or that time. But what matters? When that email went out, or when was it uploaded to a certain system? It's in the other system that you have the authoritative data about this. It's not in your system. You can combine all of this. So report on processes and not on systems. And if anybody is interested in this, probably you will get the slides, go into the big word, what they did with business intelligence. It was pretty impressive. I heard about it for the first time 3 years ago. I'm going to jump on through this. But what I just want to tell is that you are able to connect the data from the different systems that you are using into one big bucket and then manipulate the data, transform the data, and get out whatever you need. It's possible. There are tools at your fingertips. But reporting is much more complicated with cloud-based systems, funnily enough, because cloud-based systems need to push the information that relates to you because they don't give you access to the databases. Like whereas if you have something installed on your local server, you can have full access to the database. And with cloud-based systems, you would see everybody else's information, so nobody's going to give you that privilege. Therefore, what you need to do is consider this when choosing the systems. How are they able to push information into a data warehouse, into a data lake, whatever it is called. And then finally, setting up reports. So you need to decide what you want to report on. The workload, then here is a sample. Prioritization, I mean, what you can give to the project manager is that the project manager can do as many projects as they want, but what you want is revenue. Maybe they do small projects, many, with a lot of automation. Maybe they do a couple of large projects, but basically your business success depends on how much revenue they process, every person, within a week, by job type. And then late deliveries, another very important thing. And don't always aim for 0, because process orientation doesn't mean no error. It means that you are able to fix the shortcomings in your processes. How about the complaints? Again, decide how do you store this, how do you measure this? And finally, consider the profits. So with KPIs like this, with an understanding that the project manager needs to be a supervisor, with an understanding that some tolerance to late deliveries is okay, but it needs to be within a certain threshold, you are able to build the next generation of the project management team. But it only works if you really take the time to define the jobs, to define the workflows, to define every single step, document it, and once you've documented it, you can automate it as well. So what you need to do is share the responsibilities with your project managers and ask me questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, István. We are running a bit late for questions, so we have a couple of minutes. So if anyone has a question, now is the time. István, can you tell us some way to get some information from a system if we don't have a business intelligent platform? How can we grab the information?
There are some quite interesting ways. I don't know how many of you are working with XTRF, for example. They have this lovely Google Sheet add-on, and then you can just download, for example, Power BI. You can have a business intelligence system. Download it, it's free, and start analyzing the Google Sheet. And then it updates itself. But also the built-in reports are very helpful in this.
What about developers? Should we have a developer in-house? Should we look for a freelancer if we don't have the capacity?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I've seen rather large companies without a development team, like for example, Seprotec is big enough and they don't employ developers. But I think that these are things that you can reach out, for example, to experts on Fiverr.com. And it's not a very expensive thing to get people to build like data visualizations. There are lots of people who are talented in this and who can help you. So I would say that if you don't have a developer, no worries, because this is a specialized knowledge.
Hi, István.
Hi.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure picking up your incredible mind. So what's your opinion regarding connecting CRMs like HubSpot or Salesforce to the typical TMS we have in the industry, BlueNet, XTRF? We are finding it quite complex and a nightmare, and it's really, as you said, everything in an LSP revolves around the TMS, and how we connect it with other systems is, I think, very important.
I think that from that perspective, what I see is that like you need to define what and why do you want to integrate. So what functionality? I mean, that's clear that you have a client list, the client database, if it's taken over automatically, great. But do you have so many clients at a time? Do you want to do the potentials as well? Do you want to store the deals? So what I'm thinking is that if you look at it like how you would do this work manually today, fully qualified, just like with the jobs, with the tasks as I explained, then I think you understand like what are the connection points, what are the things that can be automated. And I would definitely take this approach, because I'm hearing a lot of times like, can you integrate this and this? And like, what for? What is the need? How are you going to store the, like, make the data comparable of the two? I mean, in one system you call it, I don't know, like SL, the other Sociedad Laboral. You write it out. Then already it's not the same thing. So there's a lot before this can happen. And it's not that it's technically so difficult. It's difficult because you need to control it.
I think we're officially out of time. Thank you very much, István. If you have any more questions, you can grab him out with the coffee. Yeah.